I'm joined now by Kevin Matthews. He's an assistant professor of European history at George Mason University, and undoubtedly what happened today is going to be a part of that history moving forward. We still don't know what the outcome is. Here are some of the things: crushing defeat, unprecedented, catastrophic, just some of the words, descriptions that we heard today. We pretty much knew that this was going to be rejected. She polled it last month, trying to shore up support, gave this impassioned plea yesterday. It didn't work. Why?
It didn't work because there's no support for this deal. Wasn't support for it in December when she postponed the vote, and if anything, the opposition hardened since that delay. This is historic. There has not been a defeat like this in modern British history. The closest vote, the closest defeat for a government like this was in 1924 when Ramsay MacDonald's first Labour government went down by 166 votes in a no-confidence vote. This defeat is far worse. It puts that vote in the shade.
So where does she go from here? Well, let's talk about tomorrow, which obviously is going to be another probably pelting. A lot of people will be throwing stuff at her again as well. Talk to us about that.
Well, the paradox is she's going to win tomorrow's vote. She's going to win because the Democratic Unionist Party, which is keeping her in power, is not going to vote her out because they are frightened to death of a Jeremy Corbyn-led government. They believe that Corbyn is a backer of Sinn Féin, the nationalist party in Northern Ireland. And so they'll vote to keep her in office. The question then is, what does she do? She says she'll go back to Brussels and try to negotiate a better deal, but the Europeans have already made it quite clear that there is no more negotiation. What they had on the table is what Britain is going to get. The sad thing is that there are so many, not just politicians, but the average British voters who have convinced themselves that they can get what they want from Brussels. They can, in Boris Johnson's infamous words, have their cake and eat it, and that's not going to happen. And it seems as if these people have not gotten it through their heads that Mrs. May's deal was the best that they were going to get if they're going to leave. Now they face really two prospects. Do they crash out with a no deal, or do they remain in the EU?
And I guess to remain in the EU, that would require another referendum. Is that likely, do you think?
It's getting more likely. At first, when the second referendum was proposed, most people dismissed it as a long shot. But it seems as if it would be the one way to take this out of Parliament's hands, put it back to the British voters. The problem with that is, what do you put on the ballot paper? Do you put stay in the EU, obviously? Do you put Mrs. May's deal on the ballot? And that's not likely given what happened today. Or do you put no deal and crash out of the EU and take the consequences?
Do you think that voters, to your earlier point, fell in love with the concept, this is going to be so fantastic, we're going to be out there on our own, we're going to be able to do all these great deals, and didn't understand the complexities of this?
Yeah, in a word, yes. The problem is that if you took 10 random Brexit voters, put them in a room and said, what does Brexit mean to you? Those 10 voters would likely give you 15 different responses. The referendum was handled very poorly by both sides. The government under David Cameron did not present the British voters with a positive view of what the EU stood for, how it affected their lives, why it was a force for good in Britain. And the Brexit campaign really campaigned on a series of falsehoods, and that's the kindest way you can put it.
Let me ask you one final question. I guess Monday she can present another plan, but Theresa May, she definitely was not dealt a very good hand to begin with. I mean, there's a lot of different factions she had to try and please, plus the EU. You know, we're talking about this as a divorce, but the judge in the divorce proceeding in many cases was the EU that she had to go up against. She didn't really negotiate from a strong position to begin with, did she?
No, well, she was dealt a bad hand, but she played it very poorly. That has to be said. And you can only be so sympathetic so far with Mrs. May. Nobody forced her to take this job. She campaigned for it. And if anybody is to blame, it's the Conservative Party and the Conservative voters who made her prime minister. If they wanted a more dynamic leader, if they wanted a Brexiter to be PM, they should have selected someone for that job, and instead they selected her.
Yeah, you're a guy who does history. How will she be seen in history?
I think that it's going to take some time, but sadly, she and even more so David Cameron are not going to go down very well in the history books.
Kevin, pleasure. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.